My name is Alex, and I never thought I'd be telling a story like this. For most of my life, I dismissed anything that couldn't be explained by science or logic. Religion, superstition. God, a comforting delusion for people afraid of death. I had no patience for faith. Life was simple. You were born, you lived, and you died. Nothing more, nothing less. That's what I believed, and I held on to it like a shield against the unknown. The night everything changed started like any other. It was cold, drizzling, and I was exhausted after a long shift at the office. Deadlines had piled up. My boss had been particularly insufferable, and I couldn't wait to get home, sink into the couch, and let the stress of the day melt away. Traffic was a nightmare, taillights stretching endlessly into the horizon, headlights reflecting off the wet, pavement like a scattered constellation. The monotony of stop-and-go driving only added to my frustration. As I navigated the slippery roads, I grumbled under my breath about the incompetence of other drivers. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, probably a text from my sister, reminding me to call Mom or another pointless work email. I glanced at it for a moment, long enough to register the glowing screen but not the contents of the message. That split second was all it took. The sound of screeching brakes cut through the steady rhythm of the rain. My heart leapt into my throat as I saw the headlights of a truck careening toward me, too fast and too close to avoid. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. There was the deafening crunch of metal, the shatter of glass, and then silence. Not just any silence. It was a deep, profound quiet, as if the entire world had paused. I couldn't feel the cold rain anymore or the ache of my body. For a moment I thought I might still be sitting in my car, but when I opened my eyes I wasn't in the driver's seat. I wasn't anywhere I recognized. At first there was nothing but darkness. It wasn't frightening, though. It felt oddly comforting, like the embrace of a warm blanket. Gradually, a soft light began to glow in the distance, pulsing gently, beckoning me. It wasn't like any light I'd seen before. It wasn't harsh or blinding. It was alive, shimmering with colors that didn't exist in the world I knew. The light grew closer, or maybe I was moving toward it. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I felt weightless, free from pain, fear, or worry. Then I noticed something strange. Below me I saw the wreckage of my car, crumpled metal and shattered. Glass littered the highway. Emergency lights flashed red and blue, their beams cutting through the drizzle. I saw my own body, limp and lifeless, slumped over the steering wheel. The sight should have horrified me, but it didn't. I felt detached, as if watching a scene from a movie. As I hovered above the chaos, a sense of calm washed over me. I wasn't alone. I felt it before I saw it. A presence so profound it was as though the air itself had taken on a personality. Slowly, a figure emerged from the light. It was indistinct, at first, glowing and radiant, but as it drew closer, its features became clearer. He looked human, but there was something otherworldly about him. His eyes held the weight of eternity, filled with both immense sorrow and boundless love. I couldn't speak. Words seemed meaningless in his presence. But he spoke to me, not with words, not exactly. His voice resonated inside me, more like a knowing than a sound. "You are not here by accident," he said, and his voice was gentle yet firm, like the roll of distant thunder. I wanted to protest, to say this couldn't be real, but the moment I thought it, I felt his response. It was as if he could see through me, past every barrier I'd ever built to keep the world at a distance. All my doubts, my disbelief, my stubborn insistence that nothing existed beyond what I could see or touch, they all seemed laughably small in the presence of this being. "You have questions," he said, "but first, you must see." Before I could respond, the light around him shifted, expanding outward until it consumed everything. I felt myself drawn into it, and suddenly, I was standing in a place that defied description. It wasn't a place in the way we think of places. It was everywhere and nowhere, vast and infinite, yet intimately close. And there, within the light, I began to see things. At first it was simple, Images of my life, moments I'd forgotten or buried. I saw myself as a child, laughing with my sister in the backyard, our faces smeared with dirt and popsicle juice. I saw the tears I'd caused her years later when I'd said something cruel in the heat of an argument. I saw my parents, older, now still waiting for a call I'd been too busy or too stubborn to make. But then, the vision shifted. They weren't just about me anymore. I saw people I'd never met, faces full of fear, anger, and despair, cities crumbling under the weight, people glued to glowing screens, their expressions blank as if the life had been drained from them. I saw a world fractured by division, consumed by greed, and drowning in apathy. "This is what comes," the voice said, heavy with sorrow. "If the world continues down this path." I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The images kept coming, each more vivid than the last. A child crying in the corner of a dark room, ignored by parents too consumed by their digital lives to notice. Fields once green and vibrant, now barren and gray under skies choked with smog. People arguing endlessly, their voices rising in anger, but saying nothing of substance. And then something even more chilling. A man standing before a massive crowd, his smile charismatic and his words honeyed. But there was a darkness behind his eyes. The people cheered as he spoke, their faces filled with blind adoration, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. "Who is that?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure beside me didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "Many will follow him, believing they are choosing light, but he leads them into shadows." The scene shifted again, and I saw flashes of events that felt eerily familiar. Natural disasters, wars, a growing sense of unrest. Each image carried a weight, as if the very fabric of the world was unraveling. Yet amid the chaos, I saw glimmers of hope. Small groups of people gathering together, not in fear or anger, but in unity and love. They stood firm, their faces illuminated by an inner light that seemed to repel the darkness around them. "This is the choice," he said, "the path of destruction or the path of renewal. But the time is short, and many cannot see the danger ahead." I felt a pang of guilt, sharp and undeniable. I had been one of those people, blind, dismissive, too wrapped up in my own cynicism to consider that there might be something more. I thought of the arguments I'd had with friends who believed in something greater, the derision in my tone when I called their faith a crutch. Now, standing in this place, I realized how small and arrogant I had been. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "I'm nobody. I don't have faith. I don't even believe in you." The figure turned to me, his gaze piercing yet full of compassion. "Faith is not a requirement for truth. You were chosen to see because you can reach those who feel as you do. Your life has not been without purpose, Alex, even when you believed it was." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "But how? How can I convince anyone of what I've seen? They'll think I'm crazy." He smiled, a small, knowing smile that carried an unshakable certainty. "The truth has a way of making itself known. Speak it, and let it find its place in the hearts of others. Not all will listen, but some will, and that is enough." The light around us began to shift again, and I felt an odd tugging sensation, as if I were being pulled backward. Panic rose in me. "Wait! I'm not ready. I have so many questions." "You have what you need," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Remember what you have seen, and remember this. Love is the anchor. It is the answer to the division, the greed, the fear. Lead with love, and the rest will follow." Before I could respond, the light flared brighter than ever, enveloping everything in its warmth. For a moment, I felt as though I was dissolving into it, becoming part of something vast and infinite. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. I gasped for air, my lungs burning as if I'd been underwater. The harsh beep of monitors and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled my senses. Blinking, I saw the concerned faces of doctors and nurses hovering over me. My body felt heavy, leaden, and every muscle ached as if I'd been through a war. "You're awake," one of them said, relief evident in his voice. We thought we lost you for a moment there. Lost me. The words echoed in my mind as fragments of what I'd just experienced began to flood back. The light, the figure, the visions. They felt as real as the bed I was lying on, more real even than the cold metal of the IV in my arm. Yet as I tried to process it all, doubt crept in. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by trauma? My family arrived soon after. My sister's face was pale. Her eyes rimmed red from crying. "We thought you were gone," she said, clutching my hand like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the world. "I'm here," I said, though my voice felt distant as if it belonged to someone else. But was I? Physically, yes, but everything inside me had shifted. The world outside the hospital room felt different, sharper and more fragile. I wanted to tell them what I'd seen, to share the weight of the message I'd been given, but I couldn't find the words. How do you explain something so vast, so ineffable, without sounding insane? As the days passed, I wrestled with the enormity of what had happened. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the visions again. The faces, the warnings, the light. They haunted me, not out of fear, but out of a sense of responsibility. The figure's words echoed in my mind. Speak it, and let it find its place. But where to begin? The world outside the hospital felt surreal. The sky seemed bluer, the trees greener, as if a layer of grime had been wiped from my vision. Every sound was sharper, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the laughter of children playing in the park across the street. I couldn't tell if the world had changed or if it was just me. Once I was discharged, the questions began. Friends and family asked about the accident, the recovery, how I was feeling. I gave them all the usual answers. I was grateful to be alive, taking it one day at a time, trying to get back to normal. But normal felt like a lie. How could I go back to being the person I was when everything I'd believed had been turned upside down? I avoided the subject of what had happened after the crash. How do you explain to people who know you as the pragmatic skeptic that you'd seen something beyond explanation? That you'd been somewhere not of this world, spoken to someone who radiated a presence so vast it made the universe itself feel small? Every time I thought about trying, my throat tightened and my heart raced. Weeks turned into months and life moved forward. I returned to work, sat in meetings, answered emails, and went through the motions. But it all felt hollow, as if I were living in a shadow of my old life. The message I'd been given weighed heavily on me. I thought about it constantly. The warning of division, the vision of the man with the dark eyes, the choice between destruction and renewal. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I'd sit in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail in my mind. I could still hear his voice, calm and steady, urging me to speak the truth. But every time I imagined actually doing it, I was gripped by fear. What if people laughed at me? What if they thought I was crazy? One night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through online forums about near-death experiences. The stories I read were eerily similar to mine. People describing a light, a sense of peace, encounters with beings of immense love and wisdom. Some of them had shared their experiences publicly, and I could see the comments, some supportive, others mocking, dismissive. It was both comforting and terrifying. I wasn't alone, but I wasn't sure I was brave enough to step into the fire of public scrutiny. And yet, the more I thought about the visions, the more I realized I didn't have a choice. What I'd seen wasn't just for me. It was a warning, a plea, a call to action. To keep it to myself felt like a betrayal of the gift I'd been given. The first person I told was my sister. We were sitting on her porch, sipping coffee on a crisp fall morning. She was talking about her kids, the endless shuffle of school drop-offs, soccer practice, and homework. I wasn't really listening. My mind was elsewhere, as it so often was these days. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Do you believe in God?" I asked abruptly, interrupting her mid-sentence. She looked at me, startled. I think so. Why? I hesitated, my palms sweaty. Something happened to me. After the accident. Her expression shifted, concern flickering in her eyes. What do you mean? And so I told her. Everything. The light, the figure, the visions, the message. My words spilled out in a rush, like water breaking through a dam. I expected her to interrupt, to question, to doubt. But she didn't. She listened, her face a mixture of awe and unease. When I finished, there was a long silence. I couldn't tell what she was thinking, and the suspense was almost unbearable. Finally, she said, "Alex, that's incredible and terrifying." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do with it." "You have to tell people," she said. "If what you're saying is true, if it could help even one person, you can't keep it to yourself." Her words echoed what I already knew deep down. But hearing them aloud from someone I trusted gave me a measure of courage. The first time I spoke publicly about my experience was at a small community gathering. It wasn't planned. I hadn't even meant to bring it up. Someone was talking about life's fragility, how a friend of theirs had narrowly survived a car accident, and before I knew it, I was on my feet, words spilling out of me again. The room went quiet as I spoke. I could see the skepticism on some faces, the curiosity on others. When I finished, there was a pause, and then someone said, "What do you think we should do about the warning?" I didn't have a neat answer. I think it starts with love," I said. "Choosing. Kindness over anger, connection over division. Don't know how to fix the world, but I think if we all start small, in our own lives, it can grow into something bigger." The response was mixed. Some people thanked me, shared their own thoughts on faith and purpose. Others avoided eye contact, their expressions doubtful. But I'd done it. I'd taken the first step, and it felt like a weight had been lifted. It was only the beginning. Word of what I had shared at the community gathering began to spread, and soon people started reaching out to me. Some were curious, others skeptical, and a few openly hostile. I hadn't expected the hostility, though I suppose I should have. This was a story that challenged people's beliefs, that demanded they question their worldview, just as I had been forced to question mine. At first, it was overwhelming. Strangers would approach me in the grocery store or send me long emails detailing their own experiences with faith, doubt, and moments of divine intervention. Others accused me of making it all up for attention. The words delusional and fraud appeared in online comments more often than I cared to count. But for every harsh word, there was someone who thanked me. People who said they had felt lost and now felt a glimmer of hope. A mother who told me she had been on the verge of giving up on her faith, but had decided to pray again after hearing my story. A man who admitted he had been contemplating ending his life, but had reconsidered after I shared my vision of the light and the love it radiated. Those moments made the ridicule worth it. I wasn't doing this for the doubters or the cynics. I was doing it for the ones who needed to hear it. The more I spoke about my experience, the more I began to notice something strange. It was as if the message I'd been given resonated with a deep, unspoken yearning in people. The world felt heavier than ever, divisions growing wider, fear more palpable. Yet amid all of that, there was a hunger for something greater, something true. I started speaking at larger gatherings, churches, community centers, even the occasional conference. The words came more easily with time, though the weight of the responsibility never lessened. I always tried to stay true to what I had been shown, even when it would have been easier to soften the edges, to make the warning less stark. The man with the dark eyes haunted me. I hadn't seen his face again in my visions, but his presence lingered in my thoughts like a shadow at the edge of my consciousness. I spoke about him often, though I didn't have a name or a clear identity to offer. He represents deception, I would tell audiences, a false light that will draw people in, but lead them astray. Some nodded in agreement, while others scoffed, dismissing it as paranoia or fear-mongering. But I couldn't shake the urgency of it. The figure's words echoed in my mind daily. The deception coming is greater than you can imagine. Even the faithful will be tested. It wasn't until one night, months after my first public sharing, that I understood the true scope of the warning. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling when I felt a familiar tugging sensation, gentle but insistent, like a whisper calling me back to the place I had been before. I closed my eyes and suddenly I was there again. The light was softer this time, more diffuse, but the figure stood before me just as he had the first time. "Why am I here again?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You've done well," he said, "but there is more to see." The scene around us shifted, and I found myself standing on the edge of a vast crowd. The man with the dark eyes was there again, addressing the masses. His voice was smooth, magnetic, and every word dripped with promises of unity, prosperity, and peace. The people cheered, their faces alight with adoration, but I felt a cold knot of dread in my chest. The figure beside me spoke, his voice grave. "He will offer what they think they need, but it is a lie. They will follow him into darkness, believing it to be light." I wanted to scream at the crowd, to warn them, but my voice wouldn't come. I turned to the figure, desperate. "How do I stop this?" "You cannot stop what must come," he said, his tone heavy with sorrow. "But you can prepare those who will listen. Tell them to seek the truth, to hold fast to love, to be vigilant against the shadows disguised as light." The scene began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled back to the waking world. Before I could protest, the figure spoke one last time. "You are not alone, Alex, and you never will be." I woke with tears streaming down my face, the weight of the vision pressing on my chest. This was no longer just a story I needed to share. It was a mission, a calling. And though I still felt unworthy and unsure, I knew I couldn't turn away from it. The world was changing, and the warnings were clear. It was time to act. After that second vision, my resolve deepened. It wasn't just about telling my story anymore. It was about equipping people with the tools to face what was coming. The world seemed to grow darker with each passing day. Headlines filled with conflict, division, and fear. The man with the dark eyes wasn't here yet, not physically, but I could feel his presence in the growing chaos, in the cracks forming between people who were supposed to stand together. I began to study scripture, philosophy, history, anything that could give me a better understanding of what I had seen. My nights were spent poring over texts and connecting dots, my days speaking to anyone willing to listen. I wasn't a scholar, and I wasn't a preacher, but something told me that truth wasn't reserved for the learned or the holy. Truth was for everyone. The messages I shared became less about me and more about the people I spoke to. The division begins with fear, I'd tell them. Fear of each other, fear of change, fear of the unknown. But fear is not from him. Love is, and love is what we have to hold on to when everything else falls apart. Some listened, others dismissed me outright. I started to notice a pattern. Those who had experienced their own moments of inexplicable connection, whether through faith or near-death experiences, were often the most receptive. They didn't need convincing. They already knew there was something greater at work in the universe. But the skeptics, the ones who laughed or rolled their eyes, those were the people I found myself thinking about late at night. Not because I was angry or offended, but because I understood them. I had been one of them. I knew what it was like to think you had the world figured out, to believe that everything could be explained away by logic or science or sheer coincidence, and I knew how terrifying it was to have that certainty ripped away. One evening, after a small gathering at a community center, an older man approached me. His face was lined with years of worry, his hands trembling as he clutched a worn leather Bible. "Do you really believe it's coming?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "I don't know when, but I believe it's already beginning." He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "What can we do? How do we fight something like that?" I took a deep breath, trying to summon the courage I needed to answer. "We fight it by refusing to let fear win, by choosing love and truth every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." The man reached out and clasped my hand, his grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you," he said, "for reminding me of what I already knew but had forgotten. Encounters like that kept me going, but they didn't make the journey any less daunting." The visions continued, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in moments of stillness when I least expected them. Each one added another piece to the puzzle. Images of people divided, of technology used not to connect but to control, of a world that seemed to forget its own humanity. And yet, there was hope woven into the warnings, a light that refused to be extinguished, no matter how dark the shadows grew. It wasn't the blinding light I had seen in the beginning, but a softer, steadier glow, like the flame of a single candle in a vast, dark room. I clung to that light. Not everyone understood. Some of my closest friends drifted away, unable to reconcile the Alex they had known with the person I had become. Others accused me of trying to scare people, of being a doomsayer. "Why can't you just focus on the positive?" one friend asked me during a heated conversation. "I am," I said, my voice calm but firm. "The positive is that we have a choice. We don't have to let the darkness win, but ignoring it won't make it go away." The hardest part was facing my own doubts. There were nights when I lay awake, questioning everything. What if I was wrong? What if the visions were just a trick of the mind, a desperate attempt to make sense of a traumatic experience? What if I was leading people astray? But then I would remember his voice, steady and unwavering. "You are not alone, and you never will be." I wasn't doing this for myself. I was doing it because I had seen what was at stake, and I couldn't look away. The weight of that responsibility pressed on me every day, but it also gave me strength. As the months turned into years, the message evolved. It became less about warning people and more about preparing them, building a foundation of love, truth, and unity that could withstand whatever storms were coming. And through it all, I held on to the hope that the light I had seen, the love I had felt, would be enough to guide us through the darkness. The years passed, and the world seemed to grow more uncertain with each new day. The warnings I had received felt closer than ever, as if the future I had glimpsed was rushing to meet us at an unstoppable pace. News of unrest, technological breakthroughs, and increasing divisions filled every corner of life, and I couldn't help but see the threads tying it all together. It wasn't just random chaos. It was deliberate, calculated. The man with the dark eyes had not yet revealed himself, but his influence was seeping into the cracks of our world. I spent more time traveling, sharing my story with anyone who would listen. I spoke to packed church halls and to small groups gathered in living rooms. Sometimes I spoke to just one person who had stumbled across my name online and reached out, desperate for answers. One night, after speaking at a university lecture hall, a young woman approached me as the crowd filtered out. Her eyes were red, as though she'd been crying, but her expression was determined. "Do you really think it's possible to prepare?" she asked, her voice trembling. "If what you're saying is true, how can we ever be ready for something like that?" I paused, considering her question. "It's not about being ready in the sense of having all the answers," I said. "It's about having the right foundation. Love, truth, faith. Those things can't be shaken no matter how much the world around us crumbles. But it's a choice we have to make every single day." She nodded slowly, as though she wanted to believe me but wasn't sure she could. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are," I said firmly. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing." Her tears spilled over then, and I hugged her as she cried. It was moments like that that reminded me why I had been given this mission, even though it often felt impossibly heavy. But not all encounters were so moving. I faced skeptics and critics at nearly every turn, people who accused me of fear-mongering or exploiting others' faith. At first, their words cut deep. I had always been someone who cared too much about what others thought of me, and their criticism made me question everything I was doing. It wasn't until I prayed, truly prayed, for the strength to let go of those doubts that I found peace. It wasn't about pleasing everyone or convincing them all of my sincerity. It was about planting seeds of hope, and truth, even if I never got to see them grow. The visions didn't come as frequently anymore, but when they did, they were more vivid than ever. One night, I found myself in a dreamlike state, standing on the edge of a vast, barren landscape. The sky was dark, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. In the distance, I saw two figures, one cloaked in light and the other shrouded in shadow. The figure in light turned to me, and though I couldn't see his face clearly, I felt the same overwhelming sense of love and peace that I had experienced during my near-death experience. His voice echoed in my mind, calm yet urgent. "You must not lose heart. The time is near, but so is the truth." The figure in shadow stepped forward then, his presence chilling. Though I couldn't see his eyes, I felt his gaze piercing through. "Me? Why fight?" he said, his voice smooth and mocking. "They don't listen, they don't care, let them have their world." His words made my heart ache because part of me knew he was right. So many people seemed unwilling or unable to hear the message I was trying to share, but I refused to give in to despair. "They care more than you think," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gripping me. "And I will keep fighting, even if it's just for one person who's willing to listen." The shadow figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed across the barren landscape. "We'll see," he said before fading into the darkness. The figure in light stepped closer, and his presence banished the lingering chill. "Do not fear the shadows," he said. "The light will always prevail, even in the smallest flame." When I woke, I felt both strengthened and burdened. The weight of what I had seen pressed on me, but so did the hope. The battle wasn't just coming, it was already here. And though I was just one person, I knew I wasn't alone. That morning, I sat down to write a letter to my children. I wanted them to understand what I had seen and why I had devoted my life to this message. I wanted them to know that even when the world seemed darkest, there was always light to be found. As I wrote, I realized that the message wasn't just for them, it was for anyone who would one day find it. A reminder that love and truth were worth fighting for, no matter the cost, and that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, hope could never be extinguished. The years stretched on, and though the details of my journey became more vivid in my mind, the world outside seemed to spiral deeper into the warnings I had seen. It wasn't just the headlines anymore. Something was shifting in the undercurrent of everyday life. People seemed more distracted, more disconnected, despite being more connected than ever through technology. Conversations grew shorter, tempers shorter still, and the sense of community that had once seemed natural now felt like a fragile relic of the past. Through it all, I kept speaking, though the weight of the mission was unrelenting. Some nights, I would sit alone and wonder if I had done enough, if the words I'd shared had reached the right people. Other nights, the doubt crept in again like a shadow, whispering that none of this mattered, that the world was too far gone to be saved. But each time I reminded myself of the light I had seen, of the love that had surrounded me in that first, inexplicable moment beyond death. That memory kept me steady, even when everything else felt uncertain. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, one filled with hostile emails and a fruitless speaking event, I found myself standing on my back porch staring at the stars. The night was quiet, save for the distant hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I thought about the figure with the dark eyes, about the warnings, about the people who had come to me seeking answers I often felt ill-equipped to provide. "Am I making a difference?" I whispered into the night, my voice barely audible. The air around me seemed to shift, though there was no sound, no dramatic sign. Just a gentle sense of presence, as if the weight of the stars themselves pressed closer. I closed my eyes, letting the stillness wash over me. In that moment, I felt it again, that unmistakable light. It wasn't blinding this time, nor did it pull me away as it had before. Instead, it was subtle, a quiet warmth in the cold night air. "You are planting seeds," the voice said, familiar and comforting. It wasn't a voice that could be heard with ears, but one that resonated deep within my soul. Some will grow where you can see them. Others will grow long after you are gone. The words filled me with both peace and sorrow. I had hoped for a clearer sign, a reassurance that I was on the right path. But this was enough. I had to trust that even when I couldn't see the results, the work mattered. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. The doubts hadn't vanished, but they no longer held the same power over me. I decided to focus not on the skeptics or the challenges, but on the small moments of connection, the single mother who found strength in my words, the teenager who sent me an email saying my story had helped her believe in something greater for the first time in years. One day I received a letter from a man who had been at one of my earliest talks. He wrote about how he had initially dismissed my story, convinced it was just another tale designed to manipulate emotions. But over time, he had begun to notice the patterns I had described, the growing divisions, the subtle pull toward distractions and false comforts. The letter ended with a simple yet profound line. "I see it now. Thank you for helping me open my eyes." I kept that letter, along with others like it, in a small wooden box by my bed. On the hard days, I would pull them out and read through them, letting the words remind me of why I couldn't give up. These were my anchors, proof that even in the face of doubt and resistance, the message was reaching those who needed to hear it. But the visions hadn't stopped. They came less frequently now, but when they did, they carried an intensity that left me shaken for days. One vision in particular lingered with me. I saw a great city, its skyline filled with gleaming towers and flashing lights. At first glance, it seemed alive with energy and progress, but as I looked closer, I saw cracks running through its foundation. Beneath the surface, the city was rotting, its people caught in an endless cycle of distraction and despair. At the center of it all stood the man with the dark eyes. He wasn't speaking this time. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention, a force that seemed to draw people in against their will. I felt an overwhelming urge to warn them, to scream at them to look away. But no sound came from my lips. The crowd moved closer to him, their faces blank, their eyes empty. Then, just as I thought the vision would consume me, a small light appeared. At the edge of the scene. It flickered uncertainly, but it was enough to disrupt the darkness. The man with the dark eyes turned toward it, his expression unreadable, and for a moment I thought I saw fear flicker in his gaze. The vision ended abruptly, leaving me gasping for air. I sat up in bed, clutching my chest, my heart pounding, with both terror and hope. That small light, it wasn't just a metaphor, it was real. A reminder that no matter how powerful the darkness seemed, it could never fully extinguish the light. That vision stayed with me, shaping the way I spoke about the coming trials. I no longer focused solely on the warnings or the dangers, but on the resilience of the light. And as I continued on my journey, I began to see the light in others, in the small acts of kindness and courage that so often went unnoticed. It wasn't a grand, sweeping change, but it was enough to remind me that even in the darkest times, hope was still alive. The road ahead still felt long, though the path was no longer as unclear as it had once seemed. After all these years of speaking, of sharing the vision and the message, I began to see the ripple effects of the work. Small but powerful shifts in how people connected with each other and with their faith. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but it didn't need to be. The seeds were planted and the roots were beginning to take hold. The more I shared the message of love, truth, and hope, the more I realized that the battle wasn't always fought in grand gestures, but in the quiet, everyday choices we made. I found myself traveling again. Not out of necessity, but out of the deep pull I still felt to connect with others. The energy I once sought from a crowd of listeners now seemed to flow from the one-on-one conversations, the small exchanges of encouragement, the gentle nudges of compassion. It was as if my own understanding had deepened, and in that depth, I found a renewed purpose. During one such trip, I was invited to speak at a retreat for young adults, an audience I had not connected with as much in the past. I hesitated at first, unsure if my message would resonate with them, but something inside urged me to go. I stood in front of a group of eager faces, many of them clearly searching for something, though they weren't quite sure what. For a long while, I simply listened to them, watched as they shared their fears, their dreams, their uncertainties. It was a familiar scene, the struggle between wanting to make a difference and feeling powerless in the face of overwhelming odds. But as they spoke, I noticed something. There was a fire in their eyes, a flicker of hope that hadn't been completely snuffed out by the world's noise. And in that moment, I knew why I had come. I spoke about the light, the importance of holding on to that inner spark, even when it seemed as though everything around them was trying to dim it. I spoke of the truth that couldn't be hidden, the love that couldn't be extinguished, and the small but powerful moments of courage that had the ability to change the world. By the end of the retreat, one young woman came to me, her face filled with both relief and determination. "I've been so lost," she said softly, her voice quivering. "But now I understand. I can't change everything, but I can start with myself. I can choose to fight for the light." Her words struck me harder than any praise I had received. This was what it was all for. The realization that it wasn't about changing the world in one fell swoop, but in making choices each day that reflected the light we carried inside. It was a simple truth, but one that had the power to transform everything. As I left the retreat, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. I had been given a message, yes, but it was a message that needed to be carried by all of us, not just one person. We were all lights in the darkness, and together we could create something beautiful. But even as the peace washed over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more I still had to understand. The visions had slowed, but they hadn't stopped entirely, and the warnings, though less frequent, still echoed in my mind. One evening, while I was sitting in my study, the familiar sense of warmth and presence enveloped me once again. This time, the feeling was softer, less urgent, but just as powerful. The figure I had come to recognize as Jesus appeared before me, his gaze gentle but knowing. "It's time," he said simply. My heart leapt into my throat, the weight of those words pressing down on me. "Time for what?" "To stop preparing and to begin living what you've been given," he replied, his voice filled with quiet authority. The realization hit me like a wave. I had spent so much time preparing for what was coming, warning others, spreading the message, that I had forgotten the most important part: living it. Truly living it. I had focused so much on the future, so much on the unknown, that I had neglected the present moment, the relationships, the opportunities to love and show kindness in everyday interactions. "You must live the truth now," he said again, his voice softer this time. "Now is the time to be the light in the world, and you must share that light freely, without fear, without hesitation." Tears welled up in my eyes as I understood. I had been so caught up in the weight of the future that I had overlooked the power of the present moment. I had been called, not just to speak of the light, but to embody it, to live it fully no matter what came. And so, I began again. I returned to the everyday acts of love, kindness, and truth. It wasn't about avoiding the darkness. It was about standing firm in the face of it, knowing that even the smallest flicker of hope could change everything. And as I continued my journey, I carried that truth with me, letting it guide every step, every word, every choice. The battle wasn't over, but neither was the light. The days after the vision of the flickering light were filled with an unshakable sense of urgency. It wasn't panic, nor was it despair, just a quiet, constant push in my soul urging me to act. I didn't know exactly what was coming, but I could feel the weight of its approach. The world had always moved forward in its predictable, chaotic rhythm, But now it felt as though the rhythm had shifted, like a storm building on the horizon. I started noticing things I'd been too preoccupied to see before. Conversations with strangers held undertones of weariness and fear they didn't seem to realize they were carrying. News reports talked about breakthroughs and advancements, as though they were steps forward. But they often left me wondering if we were running headlong into something none of us truly understood. And yet, in the midst of it all, there were still moments of beauty, still glimpses of the light that gave me hope. One evening, after giving a talk at a small church in a town I'd never visited before, a man approached me. He was older, his face weathered and kind, and his eyes held a depth of understanding that felt familiar, though I didn't know why. "I need to thank you," he said simply. "Your story, and it's not just a story, it's a mirror. It shows us who we are and what we're missing." I smiled, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know if I'd call it a mirror," I said, "but I hope it helps people see things they might not have noticed before." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It does, and it reminds us that we're not alone even when it feels like we are." He paused, then added, "You have a gift, but it's also a burden. Don't carry it alone." Those words stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after he walked away. I had never thought about it like that before, but he was right. The visions, the warnings, the mission, they weren't mine to bear alone. They weren't mine at all, really. They were meant to be shared, carried by all of us together. The next vision came not long after, and it was unlike any I'd experienced before. This time I wasn't shown a city or a crowd or a single figure. I was standing in a vast open field, surrounded by wildflowers and tall grass swaying in a gentle breeze. The sun was warm on my face, and the sky was the deepest blue I'd ever seen. It was peaceful, serene, and for a moment I felt a sense of relief so profound it brought tears to my eyes. Then I saw him. He was standing a short distance away, his presence as overwhelming as it had been the first time I encountered him. But this time, there was no weight of judgment, no sense of impending warning. There was only love, pure, unfiltered, and infinite. He walked toward me, his expression calm but intent. When he spoke, his voice carried a gentleness that wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. "You've done well," he said, "but the journey isn't over." I nodded, my throat too tight with emotion to respond. "You've seen what's coming," he continued, "but you must also see what lies beyond it. The trials will be great, but they are not the end. They are a refining, a preparation for what is to come." As he spoke, the field around us began to shift. The flowers and grass grew brighter, more vibrant, and the air seemed to hum with life. I realized then that this was a glimpse of what could be, a future beyond the chaos, beyond the darkness. "But how?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "How can we hold on when everything feels like it's falling apart?" His gaze met mine, and in that moment, it felt as though he could see every doubt, every fear, every question I had ever carried. "You hold on to love," he said, "to truth, to each other. The darkness cannot overcome the light if you choose to shine." The words resonated deep within me, filling me with a sense of purpose that was both humbling and empowering. I wanted to ask more, to stay in that place of peace a little longer, but I could feel the vision fading, pulling me back to the physical world. When I opened my eyes, I was in my room, the morning sunlight streaming through the window. The memory of the vision was as vivid as if I had truly been there, and its message was clear. This wasn't just about warning others of what was coming. It was about helping them see the hope that lay beyond it. From that day forward, my focus shifted. I still shared the warnings, still spoke of the dangers and the trials, but I made sure to balance them with the promise of what was to come. The flickering light, the field of wildflowers, the voice that spoke of love and truth, they became the heart of my message. I spent more time with my family, no longer consumed by the fear of what was to come, but focused on the now. I helped those in need, not as a mission, but as a natural extension of who I had become. I no longer carried the burden of the message. alone. I shared it freely with every person I met, with every smile, every word of encouragement. It was then that I realized the true message wasn't just about the darkness that was coming. It was about the light we could create right now. That was the true revolution. The choice we all had to make, to live in love, to live in truth, to live in light. And no matter what was to come, I knew this. The light would always shine brighter than the darkness. And in that light, we would find our way home. It was some time after that final revelation that I truly began to understand the magnitude of what had been revealed to me. It wasn't just a message I carried anymore. It was a way of life, a truth that permeated everything I did. I'd always thought that the greatest test would be the trials we faced as a society, the coming struggles and challenges that would shake the world. But as time passed, I realized the real test was living out that truth every single day. I'd been on the road for so long, speaking to so many, but the real change happened when I wasn't on a stage. It happened in the small, quiet moments, the ones no one saw. It was in the way I spoke to a stranger in a coffee shop, the way I listened to my children when they spoke of their fears, the way I showed patience to those who didn't deserve it. The more I embraced the light, the more I saw it reflected in others. One day, as I was walking through a park near my home, I came across an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her face was a mask of solitude. Something in her expression stopped me in my tracks. I didn't know why, but I felt compelled to approach her. "Are you all right?" I asked softly, taking a seat beside her. She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and relief. Her eyes, though tired, carried a wisdom I could not ignore. "I'm just waiting," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Waiting for what?" I asked gently. "For something I've been waiting for my whole life," she replied. "For peace, for a sign that everything will be all right." I smiled, feeling an inexplicable sense of connection. I had been waiting for something similar, though I didn't know it until that moment. Waiting for the world to change, for people to wake up, for a sign that we were on the right path. And yet, I realized, the peace we were both searching for wasn't something we had to wait for. It was something we could create now, in our lives, in our actions. "I think peace starts with us," I said, my voice steady, "with how we choose to live each day. It's in the small moments, the choices we make to love, to be kind, to stand firm in what we know is true." She looked at me then, her expression softening, and for the first time I saw a flicker of light in her eyes. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe it's already here, if we just open our hearts to it." I nodded. There was no grand revelation in that conversation, no life-altering epiphany, but in that moment, something shifted. The light had touched her, and in turn, it had touched me. It was the quiet moments like these that began to transform me, that reminded me of the power we all have to choose love, to choose light, no matter what is happening in the world around us. And as the world continued to unfold, chaotic, uncertain, and full of both beauty and despair, I held on to the simple truth that had carried me through, that the light we carry within us is the most powerful force in existence. It is the one thing that cannot be taken away, the one thing that can transform everything around us. In the years that followed, I continued to speak, to share, to warn, but always with the underlying message of hope. I began to understand that the message wasn't just about surviving the darkness. It was about living in the light, about living with purpose, love, and faith in the unseen good that still existed in the world. I can't say that I know what the future holds. The visions haven't come as often, and sometimes I wonder if they will ever return, but I no longer need them to guide me. The light I was shown, the message I was given, is now a part of me, something I carry with me always, and so I continue. I continue to live, to love, to fight for the light no matter how dark it may get, because I now understand that the light will never fail. It will never go out, no matter how hard the world may try to snuff it out. It is in each of us, waiting to be shared, waiting to be lived. The darkness may come, but the light will always shine brighter, and as long as we choose to live in it, we will find our way home.